Throwback Tuesday. I am here with my lovely co-host, Trip. Trip, how are you doing today?
I am feeling very lovely. Thank you.
Well, good. You should be lovely. I love calling you lovely for some reason.
Well, I'll take it any way I can get it. So we have a nice opportunity here. We're going to get a chance to visit and talk about the show for a few minutes before we bring our guest on. So tell me what it's like with the new video show. Have you gotten great response?
Actually, I have gotten really good response on the video show. I mean, every show, I think we keep getting better, and it's been fun to be able to do a virtual show. It's been easier almost to book guests because everybody's home. And so they're just, eager to do something exciting. So.
Well, it's funny how I was watching CNBC this morning, and they were talking about the companies that have done really well in the pandemic, and one of them is Zoom. And it's gone from being a company that business people knew about and maybe people involved in the digital world for sure. But now Zoom, great grandmothers are on Zoom. So it's become ubiquitous.
Yeah. And you know what? Did you hear when they actually had this whole thing that happened where this doctor was doing this big conference and some person hacked it and was drawing like pornographic pictures and stuff. And so they had this whole big thing because they weren't able to keep a lot of the people out of Zoom, so they could get hackers easily. But I think that they've worked on that and they've fixed it since then.
Well, actually, and my wife, who works for the Justice Department, they can't do conferences on Zoom because they feel that the security for top secret stuff is being somehow compromised. But we are in a digital world. Hackers are going to go on, and the stuff they're doing is sophomoric and stuff like that, but it's not the end of the world. And Zoom is an amazing technology.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know what I always say that like if there is a company that something's always going to happen, there's always going to be failures in a company. And I don't think that it says bad things about the company when they have these kind of failures or holdups. What I do think is impressive is how they handle it. So Zoom actually did, they send out emails, they handled it, they got their people on it right away because they want to, that's what makes a company is their customer service and how they can handle those.
Yeah, Sheila, you're 100% right. In life, when you have a job, 80% of it's going to go pretty well. 10% is going to be troubling or maybe a higher percentage, but another 10% is an S show where everything goes wrong. And how you handle yourself during that 10% really shows how you are culturally, and some companies do it amazing. So I'll give you an example. Have you heard of Shake Shack?
Yes, I saw your post on that.
Yeah,
I saw that.
So Shake Shack is made up by a restaurateur from St. Louis who's a tremendous, wonderful restaurateur, and he opened these gourmet hamburger stands, which are taking off. They do really well.
Delicious.
And they were able to get $10 million on small business funding, and then they realized that this funding was not designed for them. It really was designed for the mom and pop restaurants, and they returned the money. And what they did there was so brilliant because every profile of Shake Shack till the day the world is done is going to mention how socially conscious they are returning the money.
Right.
That publicity. But companies doing the right thing is so important because many companies don't. I'll give you an example, Boeing on the 737 MAX. They had an inherent software problem that caused 2 of those jets to crash, but they denied. And when it finally became apparent they had a problem, it was too late to fix it and keep the aircraft in the air. So now that fleet has been grounded, and Boeing has been inexorably hurt by doing the wrong thing.
Yeah. Well, and I learned that lesson even on a personal level when I was a manager. I was a manager for IHG, and we did hotel sales and everything. And I learned that, the best thing to do was and I was a manager in customer service as well, be honest and be empathetic with their situation. And once you can do that and take ownership of that, then everything else goes better.
Yeah. So, now you do have to do it right the second time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You have to fix the problem. The problem needs to be fixed. But
yeah,
yes,
you can't keep doing it wrong. And we joke that a production company that I work for in Vegas we do it right the third time production. So humorous
Just in case.
me, but, well, the worst mistake that I ever made, and it was people that worked for me when I was running a TV station down in Vegas. And Nevada Childhood Cancer Foundation, which is an amazing foundation that was headquartered in Las Vegas, and I was lucky enough to do a lot of their videos. And at our banquet, which would have a couple thousand people, we'd honor 3 families a year who'd lost a hero. And what happened is that one family didn't want to speak at the banquet. They were terrified. So they came into the studio, and I interviewed them, talked about their daughter. And my crew at the TV station and me responsibly, we lost the tape. And I had to call this family and tell them that. And they were very sweet about it. And they came back into the station, and we did an interview that was just so gripping. And they did a much better job talking about their daughter, because maybe the nerves were not as bad the second time around. But it was a case where I had screwed up horribly, and the people were so nice about it. But the tape, when we played it at the dinner, and they were there, they just didn't want to go up on stage. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. So when you make a mistake, own up to it. Our president, not very good at that.
Right.
He has never made a mistake. And he was a mentor, or Roy Cohn, who was a horrible man, one of the worst attorneys in the history of the U.S. government, was his mentor back in the 70s. And Roy Cohn was also the attorney for Senator McCarthy in the 50s. Just a horrible, deplorable, terrible human being. And he taught Trump, never, ever admit you're wrong. And when someone hits you, hit him 5 times harder. And that's what Trump does. And he's our president. So maybe it works.
Yeah. Well, I don't
Tell
know.
us about our guests today.
Yes. Okay. So I am so excited that Jeff is going to be joining us. And actually, I do think he's here, but I can't see his lovely face. I met Jeff actually online, I think through a mutual friend. And there he is. He wrote a book, and I'm going to let him talk about that. But he really it just stood out to me, because it's something that I'm very passionate about as well. And since he wrote a book, and I was on it was a little over a year ago, and I said, I want to write, I've been writing this book of mine, and I want any advice, any tips that I can get. And he said, you know what, buy me lunch, and I will have as much information as you want, and I will help you. And he actually did really start that focus for me to get my book done. And once I did get done, 8 months, I think it was like 8 months later, he introduced me to an editor, and she's been amazing. Her name is Mary Holden, and we are just getting that uploaded it just was sent off to the graphic designer. So it's exciting for me, because Jeff is also going to be endorsing my book, and he'll have a little thing on the back of it, which is super cool. But Jeff, welcome to our show. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being on here with us.
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And I see you're in the lovely tropical area of the virtual backgrounds. It's wonderful.
Yes, also known as my den.
I know. I should probably do that too.
No, don't. So Jeff, you're an ER doctor who is also an author, and you also look at things from a very unique perspective. You sound like a very eclectic guy.
Well, some things kind of creep up on you when you're least expecting it. I never thought of myself as an artist until I started to paint a few years ago, and then I started to sculpt, and I found it extremely enjoyable. It was such a stark contrast to practicing medicine, because when I'm sculpting, if something doesn't turn out the way I want, I just whack it off and grab a new piece of clay and start again. You can't.
I'm glad you're not a surgeon.
Emergency medicine.
ER doctors are unique people. You guys are the high wire artists in the medical business. It takes a lot to do ER, doesn't it?
Some days are pretty demanding. Some days are not so bad, but it's, as they say, more than a job. It's an adventure. And some of my colleagues in the present day are really seeing a lot of that. Some of them are overwhelmed, and it's challenging times. I'm not seeing patients anymore, so I'm not seeing COVID-19 patients, but emergency departments are unique places.
Do you miss it?
And I say that without reservation because I know the path I'm on is the right path. I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I don't have reservations. I don't have guilt. I just go forward.
So tell us about your path now and about your book.
My book had its birth in a strange way, in a sense, because way back when I was 11 years old, my 15-year-old brother was killed in a farm accident. And I thought I got through it unscathed. I didn't think it had any impact on me until 20 years later when he came to me. And he said, "You have to go visit our mother because there's things she's never told you about my death." And that got my attention.
Yeah, as well it should.
So I went and visited with my mother. And that was the first day she told me that she always knew where I was in the house before my brother Stan died because she could hear me singing. And she said, "When Stan died, you stopped singing." And that was the beginning of a processing of realizing that my brother's death had a significant impact on me, a significant psychic impact. And when I was still a teenager, I started to get messages. One of them, I think, saved me from a fatal car crash by telling me to slow down. And I believe that voice that was speaking to me on that occasion was my brother. So these things happened over a period of decades, actually, gradually increasing in significance and sometimes hearing, sometimes seeing, until in the emergency department, it just felt normal and natural to me, even to the extent sometimes of seeing souls leave their bodies when they died and communicating with them before they left. And I never talked about it during my career, during my medical career. It wasn't something that felt right to talk about for some reason. But when I stopped seeing patients a few years ago, about 6 months after I stopped seeing patients, I just had this feeling one day that it was okay to talk about it now. And that's when I started to share some of my experiences. And 6 months later, my book was published. So that's how it came about. And it's about some of my spiritual experiences or other worldly experiences, mostly in the emergency department.
Do you think that if you'd communicated your feelings on that subject when you were an active member of a team at an ER room, that some of your colleagues would have been concerned or worried about you or thought less of you?
I think some of them would have had reservations about it. Some of them might have been accepting of it. And I don't know this because it didn't happen. I'm only viewing it in retrospect and speculating. But I think the reason I felt that it wasn't right to share wasn't so much for my colleagues, it was for the patients. Some people would feel comforted or reassured by a physician that had these kind of experiences, and others would not like it at all. And if I'm working a night shift in the emergency department and there's no other doctor around and I walk into a room and somebody says, "Hey, I saw you on the news. I know who you are. You're that guy that hears things." And they might not have liked that. And I don't think it would have been fair to them. So I think that might have been one reason I was constrained not to speak about it.
Yeah. And Shalise, how would you feel if Jeff was your physician and he talked about things that weren't normal and what is normal anymore? But would you have been concerned, Shalise?
Well, no, because that is also one of the things that, I actually am a very spiritual person, and having lost my son, a lot of the things that I do, I feel like I'm working with him through the other side. I don't necessarily have the gift of, I don't see things, but I definitely feel them and I get impressions. And so somebody like that to me actually would make it, I would be okay with it because it's not weird for me. But I can see how some people would have, reservations about that, and one of my questions that I was going to ask you is if during all this, if people would think you were.
I didn't realize the earthquake
It's
is going on.
We're just going to blame it on an earthquake. Just kidding, people. It's not an earthquake. Don't panic. No, but if they were to think you were crazy, or even like your the higher ups or anything like that, I mean, that could be part of the thing that would hold me back from saying that I feel this way, or I see these things, or I interact with souls. I mean, I definitely, I am one of those people who wants to know my audience before I start speaking about stuff like that.
And I relate with that very much. I was very closed-mouthed about these things, and I felt that they were sometimes too sacred to talk about. And like you, I wanted to know who I was speaking to before I spoke. I'll give you one example. A guy named Jeff Olsen, and I can use his name now because he shared this publicly. I'm not disclosing anything. Was involved in a car crash 23 years ago, and it was a rollover accident that took the life of his wife and his 14-month-old son and nearly killed him. And he was transported to the trauma center where I was on duty. And when I went into the trauma room where he was unconscious and a bunch of people were providing his care, his recently deceased wife was standing above him in the air, observing what was going on, and she communicated with me. I didn't speak about it at all. And about a month later, a nurse who had similar spiritual kind of experiences and actually shared that experience with me came to me a month later and said, "We have to go tell Jeff what happened." I said, "No, we don't. If you want to go talk to him, go talk to him. I don't need to share my spiritual experiences with any total stranger." But this is what happened. She was very persuasive, and she drugged me to his hospital room. And she did most of the talking and shared what we'd witnessed. And my friend, and he's now my friend, Jeff Olsen, told me, he didn't tell me this for 20 years, but he told me recently, he said, "Yeah, you stood in the corner. You didn't say much. You just kind of stood there and nodded." And I thought, yeah, that sounds like me. That's probably an accurate recollection. But as we shared this experience, this patient, Jeff Olsen, started to cry. And he opened up and explained that he had left his body while it was still trapped in the wreckage of the vehicle, and he had ascended above the scene of the accident and had an encounter with his deceased wife, who said, "You have to go back and raise our son, our other son that lived." And so he'd already had that experience, and he was struggling with it, trying to understand it, trying to know if he could believe it. And when he heard me share my experience with his deceased wife, it resonated with him, and he was able to share his experience with me, and we're still good friends today.
Is that a blessing?
It's a profound blessing.
Don't you do even speaking events and things like that with him now?
Yeah, Jeff and I do a lot of speaking engagements together.
How is that? Tell me about that.
We kind of pitch it back and forth, taking turns sharing the experience. He talks about the crash and some of the things that happened at the scene, and then he's transported to the hospital, and then I chime in and talk about seeing his wife and communicating with her while he was unconscious on the gurney. And then over a period of months during his healing process, we shared a number of spiritual experiences together, and we would get together and have these long conversations about what does it mean? How do we interpret it? What about, how do we reconcile this with some of the things we grew up being taught? And because they didn't always jive. And so we still have those long conversations today, 23 years later.
Wow. So when you're doing a speaking engagement with him, what is the takeaway? What do you want people to learn from that, or to get from that?
I have a lot of friends in the arena of near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and other spiritually transformative experiences like this. I'm good friends with a lot of national bestsellers who have written on their experiences. And in my experience, the message is almost always the same. You are loved. You are divine. You're enough.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
In fact, I was getting ready to speak to a large group one time, and I was getting centered. I was trying to find the message that I was supposed to share. And I said, what is it I'm supposed to share? And the message came very clearly, very profoundly. You're enough. You're divine. You're loved. That's what I was told to share.
Jeff, I'm having some sort of image now that I'm seeing that behind you.
Yeah.
Am I having an extra experience here?
As we were chatting, I just changed my my virtual background.
I am feeling
See how
so
fancy?
This is pretty high tech, I'll tell you.
So I went and I delivered that talk to this large group of people, and I asked a friend of mine who's more talented than I am in many ways if she could put it in a graphic for me, and she brought together this little graphic for me. And it was only a few weeks later, I was talking with somebody who's an international speaker. He's very talented. He's highly compensated for what he does. And I asked him a question, and he must have thought I was asking for advice, because he launched into this prepared dialogue about how you need to tailor your message to your audience, increase your audience, and make it something that'll reach out to them and touch them and bring them in. And I was going to meet with a client a few weeks later, and I was pondering what this guy had told me about, you need to tailor your message to your audience. And I was thinking, well, how do I tailor my message? And the voice that had spoken to me several weeks earlier came back to me and said, I gave you the message. I'll bring you the audience.
Oh, that helps. That helps. So, Jeff, one of the things that people talk about is near-death experiences, and that virtually everyone who has them, whether in a hospital, or many cases in a hospital, they see a light, they see a path, they talk to people, they're very comforted. And when they come back and they regain consciousness, they uniformly say this is one of the most amazing experiences, and those people believe in an afterlife and a very active afterlife. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally resonate with that. I haven't had a near-death experience, but I've had shared death experiences, some of which I've described to you, where someone else dies and you have some profound spiritual experience. I've had a number of those, and it resonates with my experiences as well. And consistently in my experience and in those of my friends, when they are out of their body, when they are dead, if you will, they feel more alive than at any other time in their life. They feel that they are more in tune with their eternal nature and who they really are than at any other time. And that's why my book, Not Yet, the subtitle is Near Life Experiences and Lessons Learned. I don't like to call them near-death experiences. I use the term because everybody's familiar with it. But in reality, more descriptively, I think they're near-life experiences, nearer to the eternal spiritual life that we are.
Well, with that, I think we should take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear more from you, Jeff. All right, welcome back to Coffee Talk Tuesday. My name is Sheila, and I'm here with Trip. Cheers. And our lovely, now Jeff gets to be the lovely one. I need to use another word, another adjective.
There are words for gender specific. I mean, just not, handsome, distinguished.
Lovely's great.
See, he likes it. You can be lovely today, Jeff. And just so I know I told you this on break, but I'm going to go ahead and share it with our audience. The earthquake that happened was my son, and he spilled coffee all over my seat because my coffee was down there, and now I'm sitting in a coffee butt. So
Jeff,
that's exciting.
Coffee is a euphemism for gin. Straight gin is what she typically drinks during these shows.
Not today. Okay. I'm doing the Whole 30. I'm on day 8, by the way, of Whole 30. And when this airs, I'll be a whole another week, which will be awesome. But anyway, I can only drink straight black coffee for fun.
Well, so I had a friend that said there's 2 things you should never mix, your coffee and your bourbon, unless, of course, you're putting your bourbon in your coffee.
In your coffee, yes. And after my Whole 30 thing, I'm going to be doing that.
Okay, so Jeff, we were talking about in your case, near life experiences, near death experiences. So people who aren't spiritual in the medical community explain that when people have these experiences, that it's a combination of things going off in your mind. And as you can see, I didn't take biology in college, so I'm not sure what those are, endorphins, that sort of thing, that create those experiences. What are your thoughts in regard to that?
There are a number of theories. The most common probably is that it's a reaction to an anoxic brain injury, i.e. not enough oxygen to your brain.
That's what my other thought was, but yeah. You're smarter, so thanks for saying that.
There's been, it's been proposed that they're temporal lobe seizures. Temporal lobe seizures can have very unusual presentations, including hallucinations. Some people have suggested that it's drug effect or psychosis, or it's an endorphin neurotransmitter dump associated with severe trauma. There's been a lot of proposed mechanisms. None of them hold up to great scrutiny when they're looked at with any rigor. My friend Bruce Grayson started the Department of Perceptual Studies at University of Virginia. He's a psychiatrist. He was actually the attending physician when Raymond Moody attended UVA, if you've ever heard of Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death experience 40 years ago. And Bruce Grayson has looked at all of these things very carefully. None of them really explain people's experiences from a medical standpoint.
That's very interesting. So these people that have looked at it very seriously are on your side of the ledger, or it might not be on your side, but they can't come up with a definitive reason why the brain goes to such optimistic, wonderful thoughts.
As a matter of fact, Raymond Moody had his PhD before he went to medical school 40 years ago, when he coined that term near-death experiences and wrote his books, started writing his books on near-death experiences. And for 40 years, he was a skeptical, detached researcher who did not believe in life after death, despite all that he'd written. He told me recently that it was when he read my book and heard my experience with Jeff Olsen that he gave up his doubts and concluded that there is indeed life after death.
Wow, that is a heck of a testament.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome, Jeff. That's a really great. I actually, since I've dealt with a lot of loss and everything as well, and with my story, one of the coolest things that I've experienced with my side of things, with just the afterlife necessarily, or not necessarily a life after death, because he never came back, but one of the coolest things that I love is that a lot of the people that I work with rainy days and things like that, with kids in the hospital, several of them at this point have told me that they feel like they know my son now, and that they felt him specifically, his energy, his spirit around their children when they've been going through things. And it's one way that I love. The reason why I keep going too is because I get to keep him alive in that way, which is super cool. And another really cool thing that has happened is that one of my dearest friends, her son was in the hospital when he was a tiny baby. So he would have no idea about my story or anything like that. And he died on the operating table, but they brought him back. But he has a lot of issues now and things that he deals with, but he's also an amazing child. Now this is my dog. This is wrapped up in the cord, sorry. But so her son just last year said that he felt this boy, and he described my son, and she called me. They live in California, and she called me and told me about this. And so like that's why I can't deny it. Like this, there's things, and for me, it's like, if it's really not true and it is something in the brain that makes all of this stuff up somehow, some way, it's not going to matter anyway. But right now, for me, it's getting me through this life. It's getting me to that point where I'm comforted in knowing that.
Yes, and if I could just toss in one little insight when you said your son didn't come back, I would change your words just a little bit to say, my son did come back. He told me he was okay. And now he's helping me and he's helping others. And one of the things I do, because now I do personal intuitive mentoring with people. I help them step into that. That's how we met with Lunch with Jeff, right? My introductory Lunch with Jeff. Buy me lunch and I'll give you 2 hours.
I was the first one on that, by the way.
Yeah.
And by the way, Jeff, where did she go and how much did she spend? Let's see what the worth was.
We went to the Dodo.
Oh, well, a friend of mine owns it, so
see,
good on you there. Yeah,
Thank
Dodo
you.
is not a cheap lunch. So Jeff,
No.
you know, you gave her probably $4,000 worth of information, but you got a $20 lunch out of the deal.
Hey, it's good. I don't do what I do for money. But I'm happy to be paid since I have no other income right now.
By the way, why did you stop practicing medicine? Did you feel that this was more of a better use of your time?
I started doing some consulting for a medical device company, and that was paying the bills when I stepped away from clinical medicine. And then I went through this transition and this kind of awakening, if you will, and I was having a series of profound experiences that moved me toward what I'm doing now with the personal mentoring and speaking and things. And I made a conscious decision that I was going to do what felt right and I wasn't going to worry about the money. And again, I had these experiences, and this mission statement came to me. And my personal mission statement is, I exist to help souls heal. That's what I do. That's why I'm here. And it's easy to make a decision to not worry about money when you have a job. But a few months later, the company said they were going through some difficulties. They said, we can't use you anymore, and they let me go. And so I've had no other income for about a year. But every time I think about going back to doing something else, I just feel like I have this heavy, dark feeling that closes in around me until I dismiss it and say, no, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And then it disperses, and I have a knowledge. I feel confident that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I just haven't worked out the finances yet.
Well, that sounds to me like you have a higher calling. And many times people who are blessed with the abilities that you have, it's not reflected in remuneration. But, you know, on the other hand, you probably are pretty happy when you wake up every morning.
I wake up pretty well, yes. I was with my friend Mary Neal at a conference, and she said something once that really stuck with me. She was the chief of spine surgery at USC when she was on a kayaking trip in southern Chile and was trapped underwater for 30 minutes and had a near-death experience. And she's written a New York Times bestseller. And she actually came back with a list of things that she was to do. And I heard her in this conference speaking, and somebody asked her if she ever felt guilty about not being able to do enough or do whatever other things the person had on their mind. And Mary looked at her, and without a moment of hesitation, she said, I never feel guilty. I know I'm doing what God wants me to do. That's where we need to be in our lives. That's where I help people get to when I meet with them personally for mentoring.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, to come back to that as well, because I think that's phenomenal. And so you do one-on-one intuitive mentoring, or what did you call it?
Is it all right if I share a little experience from our session?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fine with me. Anything we can find out about Sheila that will potentially embarrass her in the future.
This is my grounded, other side of me though, Trip.
Okay.
I wouldn't share this without her permission.
No, you have my permission. I'm writing a book that discloses everything pretty much about me. So go ahead.
I was sitting across the table from her. We were an hour into our conversation, and I had this download. I have a feeling where it came from, but it was so clear. It was so profound. And I looked at her and I said, it's not your fault. Don't feel guilty about this anymore. And she started to talk about something else. She started a deflection. And I was stopped, and I stopped her again. I said, it's not your fault. Don't feel guilty about this anymore. And I had to say it 3 times before she finally registered, and she started to cry. And she didn't even realize she was holding on to that guilt. She thought she'd gotten through it all. But those are the kind of experiences I have with virtually every client, is something that helps them get their mind around what the next step is in their life.
That's pretty profound.
And it's so good, because sometimes we do just need those little whispers. Yeah. Yep. And it happens.
Sometimes we need to clack somebody over the head with it. It needs to be more than a whisper.
Well, yeah, like Trip.
Yeah. I'm going to go out to the car and get my hockey helmet, so I'll finish up the show in just a sec.
This is really why we're not filming in the studio anymore. He was getting abused.
Yeah. I have my own recording studio right here, and but Jeff, you are a very, very entertaining and informative guest. This has been a wonderful 40 minutes.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you.
Yeah.
I had an experience not so long ago. A messenger came to me, and I was a really closed-mouthed guy. I didn't talk about my experiences. And this messenger came to me one day, and he said, "Every experience is to enable you to help someone else." I said, "Whoa, wait a minute. I thought experiences were for personal growth. And then if I wanted to, I could go help somebody else." And the messenger said, "The primary purpose of every experience is to enable you to help someone else. You get the secondary benefit of personal growth." Changed my perspective on things.
Yes. And you know what's so beautiful about that, before we go, like, that's exactly what our guest last week, Sean, I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago now, Sean was saying that, because he was talking about his heroin addiction and overcoming that, and how grateful he is to have gone through that. So now he can save other lives as well. So, and that's why I do what I do. And sometimes, it is for that personal gain, because I'm like, I'm hurting right now and it makes me feel better to help somebody else. And so, but we all benefit from that as well. So thank you, Jeff, so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable and opening up. And we will have all the information about your book and everything else that you do in our links, in our blogs. And so I just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Any last
Jeff,
words, Trip?
thank you. Okay. This has been a great show, Shalise. This is the new me. I am going to be respectful, and you won't even know I'm here.
Change does happen. You can teach an old dog new tricks.
Okay, maybe it'll happen for 1 week. Hey, just
all of our viewers and listeners,
just be cautious, Trip. I notice it's still recording, so be careful what you promise to.
Okay.
Well, next week our guest is actually a nurse that is working in the ER, or not the ER, but a nurse at the primary children's hospital, and she actually is working in the COVID unit in the Riverton Primary Children's Hospital.
Wow.
So it'll be really, really nice to have her on to talk about those experiences too, and what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and our medical workers are amazing. For Shalise and our guest Jeff, I'm Trip. We will see you next time. Thanks so much. Let people know about the show. We'd love to have more listeners and viewers. We sure enjoy doing it. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.